Hello everybody. This week's technique is AutoMove, or more specifically AutoWalk. And just to give this technique some context, um, in the unified mindfulness system there is a way of organizing all of the mindfulness techniques, meditation techniques, into 4 quadrants. Now this is the camera's reversed, so this will be backwards, but you can still see the quadrant set up. So the first 2 techniques we covered, see, hear, feel, and feel, rest, belong in the appreciate quadrant. The appreciate techniques are geared toward experiencing the senses with a radical fullness or engagement. The transcend quadrant is where we'll find the transcend techniques, one of which is the feel flow technique we did. The transcend techniques are geared toward contacting something beyond the senses. So the flow is the kind of quality of our experience that's not quite see, hear, or feel, but a quality that all of those sense categories share. Next week we'll work on a nurture positive technique where we build positive see, hear, or feel in our subjective experience. And this week we're focusing on the express quadrant. is very unique in that it's the only system of teaching mindfulness or meditation that I'm aware of, at least, that has explicit techniques for fostering or cultivating a spontaneity in expression, in motor expression. So what we've been focusing on so far is the sensory perception side of our experience. What we see, what we hear, and what we feel around us and within us in our thoughts and emotions. The express quadrant focuses rather on the motor output side of our experience. So instead of instead of focusing on what we're noticing perceiving, we're actually focused on what we're noticing being expressed. So instead of see, hear, feel being the focus, we're thinking along the lines of do, say, think. Okay, that's how we express. That's our output, as it were, whereas see, hear, feel is more of the input to the sensory system that we are. So the auto practices are focused on observing the spontaneous, natural, just happeningness that occurs in the body or in speech or in thought. And in this specific technique, AutoMove, we're going to use the body's movements to highlight and focus on the quality of spontaneity or natural unfolding. It's like we're watching our bodies move without moving it. And that sounds maybe a little paradoxical or abstract, but this is something that happens all the time. Every time you move, there's probably some portion of that movement that is intentional, and probably a larger portion that's not quite fully under your control or fully intentional. So, for instance, as I decide to use my hands to speak, to aid in speaking, for instance, part of what I'm doing might involve my decision to show some more expression with my hands. But all of the small movements of my fingers and my arms and coordinating their rotation and balancing the weight so I don't throw my hand way up in the air, those are things that are automatically provided for me by my body, by my body's movement and coordination systems. It's proprioceptive ability. And so when we walk, that is a very strong majority of that process. When we get up and walk across the room, what we're really doing is kind of telling our body, to get up and walk across the room. And then providing our body some constraints of variability so that it can do its thing. We're getting out of the way and letting our body walk us across the room. And what this practice does is it sensitizes us to that just happening quality, or that spontaneous quality of bodily expression. And as we get more sensitized to it, we can gradually notice it more and more often. And as we do that, it can be a very playful way to add some kind of bounce to our physical expression. And the practice itself is a little bit hard, a little bit subtle, I would say, to get the hang of. It's very often the auto techniques are ones that people kind of have to grope around with and experiment with. But I would encourage you to treat it like a sort of playful experiment. If you were to remember of in your childhood, for instance, of maybe splashing around in a mud puddle or kind of just flopping your arms around and run in circles, letting your body fall and pick it up again. Those childlike, spontaneous modes of physical play are a result of this auto quality to our movement. So I'll ask you to do the AutoWalk technique on your own, where you basically let your body walk for you. Drop a little of the intention to control how you're walking, and let your arms kind of swing, let your hips move back and forth, let your legs just carry you wherever you're going, and allow your attention to be drawn to the fresh or new or spontaneous quality of the body moving on its own. And you don't have to use labels for this or the noting technique. You just kind of keep your awareness open to it. But as a sensitizing exercise, what I'd encourage us to do now for a couple of minutes is assume a seated posture for practice. And go ahead and, for this exercise, close your eyes. And allow your body to begin to rock back and forth. Just gently from right to left, maybe from front to back, or some circular pattern. Whatever you happen to let your body move toward, just let it begin moving or rocking at your own pace, your own direction. And as you're doing that, do your best to notice how, as you gave the body direction to begin moving, it has the capacity to begin moving on its own, kind of keeping track of the balance and the rate of movement, the speed, letting the body kind of correct itself when it needs to, and focus your attention on the spontaneous auto quality that you might notice happening in each of these bodily movements. Maybe noticing muscles contract and relax from the ribs, or maybe his shoulders. Notice your hands and arms repositioning themselves as necessary. And as you focus on that spontaneous quality of the body rocking or moving as you've asked it to, just try to stay open to its kind of freshness. And remember, if this is a little subtle or difficult to contact, just try to stay with it and keep yourself open to that new or fresh quality of the body moving spontaneously in small or more obvious ways. Okay, now you can go ahead and straighten yourself up and open your eyes. So that kind of exercise, to some of you, might have been a little bit of like, what are we doing here? And that's fine. What I'd encourage you to do is experiment with it in a kind of playfully scientific way. Do your best when you're walking. You're attending to the spontaneous movements of walking, either by letting your attention freely float around the body, maybe noticing the hips for a moment, noticing the ankles kind of arranging themselves, or the swinging of the arms. Or you can keep your attention to one place of the body, say, noticing just the movement of the knees, for instance, and really honing in, tuning in to the spontaneous quality that they move as they move kind of on their own to adjust to your bodily movement. Or you can focus on the whole body at once, more like trying to watch the whole ocean instead of individual waves, and kind of get a feel for the just moving quality that your body takes. Another sort of option is noticing how your gait or your style of movement while you walk maybe has a little bit of a connection to your idiosyncratic personality. Maybe there's a little of you kind of expressing yourself through the way your body walks for you. And if you're really having trouble contacting that spontaneity, which would be understandable, it is a tricky thing at first, but again, with a little playful attitude, it can be enjoyable. Do your best to maybe watch for more obvious examples, like it's very useful for me, for example, to notice my eyes move around. The sudden sort of jumping around that I notice my eyes move. So your eyes don't move smoothly; they twitch back and forth, and your brain kind of fills in the blanks of the spaces. So if you pay attention, your eyes move rapidly and suddenly, very, very often, and just kind of stepping back and, as it as it were, watching your eyes move like that, and notice the spontaneous nature that movement takes. The body also uses muscles to regulate your breathing. Anything like that, your bodily posture or balance, correction, stuff like that. So spend some time this week working with some of the 3 techniques we've already done in formal sitting practice. Try to aim for the 10-minute a day, more days than not. You can use the recordings I've provided if you wish to. And then outside of that practice time, maybe as a formal practice, maybe a 5 or even 10-minute period of walking meditation where you're doing this AutoWalk technique. Like if you have a habit of walking around the neighborhood, for instance, that'd be a good time to do it. Try experimenting with dropping as much intention as you can to walk, and let your body sort of take over in its own natural walking way. This can kind of look goofy and wobbly sometimes. So if you're embarrassed around your neighbors, you can keep some of the intention. But if you're maybe alone, or you just don't care if people see you walking goofy, try to drop your intention. Let the arms and legs just move on their own and get you from one place to another without your having to be very much a part of the directional process there. So do some playful experimentation. You can use the sensitizing exercise if you wish, or experiment with other movements as you eat. You chew pretty naturally, spontaneously, without having to think about it, things like that. And I'd love to hear any questions if anyone just feels totally blocked with confusion by this type of technique. But keep in mind that it is something that people tend to need to kind of experiment and grope around with a little bit. So try your best. So hopefully I'll see any of you who can attend next week, when we'll cover Feel Good. And what I'd encourage you to do, if you're coming to the class, or if not, to try to prepare a 10-minute playlist of music that you feel tends to elicit positive emotion for you. And we'll be practicing next week actually with earbuds, listening to music and letting that music kind of trigger, so that we can trigger positive emotion in the body, so we can build it and sustain it. So I appreciate you all your interest in practicing these things with me, and look forward to being in touch with some of you as the next few weeks roll out.